Chris is a graduate of UGA undergrad. He's a double dog, Georgia Law School. He's vying to become the most famous Alston and Bird alumni since Bobby Jones, despite his relatively short career there. But after private practice, as many of you know, he served as chief of staff for Johnny Isakson, and in 2013 was named by Governor Deal to be the commissioner of the Georgia Department of Economic Development, where he spent about 3 years and really did a lot of great work for the state in those 3 years, including in the film industry, and generated a lot of economic opportunities for us in the state. And of course, was appointed as Attorney General in 2016, won a statewide election in November of 2018 to serve a full 4-year term. And despite all of those great accolades, what I really think gave Chris his start in law enforcement was his role as a member of the Canadian Mounted Police in the 8th grade performance of Little Mary Sunshine, which people at Marist still talk about today. Please welcome Attorney General Chris Carr.
Brian, thank you so very much for that kind introduction. What Brian didn't tell you is he and I graduated from the Marist School in 1990 together. And I've said that's what a smart member of the class of 90 looks like. Well, good morning, everybody. It is great to be here. Brian, thank you so very much for inviting me to be here. Brian has been a longtime friend. And when he said that he and Mitch Mitchelson and Joe Whitley were hosting this event and asked me to come, I said, absolutely. And then I found out that I'm the opening act for our 3 U.S. attorneys, Solicitor General of the United States of America. I told BJ, I am the Skid Row to y'all's motley crew. So if y'all grew up in the 80s, you will get that reference. And then BJ looks at me and says, no, the Kip Winger to our motley crew. So that's an even more obscure reference there as well. It truly is an honor to be here and to talk about the Department of Law. One of the things that I think is important to talk about is the partnerships that we have. And I'll mention this in a little bit, but I do want to say, and Charlie said, please use half of your remarks to introduce me and talk about my biography. But Charlie, BJ, and Bobby are not only incredible U.S. attorneys and great partners in a lot of what we do, they're dear friends of mine. BJ and I were in law school together, but also at Alston and Bird. He took my office when I left to go to the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. I say the intelligence factor went up dramatically when he did. Charlie and I have known each other since undergrad. We were in law school together. His wife was a law school classmate of ours as well. And Bobby and I have gotten to know each other through his work in the Georgia National Guard and through so many other relationships that we have. And we're very, very fortunate. A lot of what we do is to work with them. And I think that those partnerships and relationships are important for a number of the issues that I will talk about, but also as we work with our local partners as well, which are DAs and sheriffs and police chiefs and that sort of thing. But it is great to be here. It's truly an honor to be before you today. And one of the things I do want to talk about is the department. And I do this when I speak to Rotaries or when I speak to Chambers of Commerce, but also when I get in front of lawyers. Because what I have found is a lot of lawyers will look up and say, what do you really do? What's the Department of Law? Because each state does it differently. I know we have folks from around the region that are here. Welcome to Georgia. Please stay and spend a lot of money. As the former Commissioner of Economic Development, we would love to do that for you to do that. But each state does it differently. Each state crafts their Department of Law, their Attorney General's office based on their constitution, and everybody does it a little bit differently. So let me just mention just briefly who we are. We're 150 in-house lawyers. I mean, we're obviously the lawyers for the people of the state of Georgia, and each and every day we represent the agencies, the boards, and the authorities that comprise state government. 150 in-house lawyers, 150 professionals that are auditors and investigators and IT folks and policy people like Nick Smith, who's here today with our office as well. But we also hire 200 to 300 special assistant attorneys general who around the state help us whenever we have a geographic or a subject matter need. And oftentimes those lawyers, and some of y'all in this room may have been a SAG at one point, but oftentimes it's DOT, Department of Transportation, child support, and DFACS are the big issues that we have, but also specialty cases like the water litigation that we have right now as it relates to the state of Florida. So that's kind of who we are. So we're a 500 to 600 person law firm. On any given day, we are handling about 21,000 different matters. So as I like to say to this, well, let me just give you a comparison. Is Texas a little bit bigger than we are? We're the 8th largest state in the nation. Texas claims to be bigger than we are. They're a little bit bigger. That's a joke. I know it's early, and last night sounds like it was a lot of fun, so that's great. Texas has 3,000 lawyers and 1,200 support staff. So those of you that are taxpayers in the state of Georgia, you're getting a good bang for your buck from our little law firm. But what we do is we represent, as I said, the agencies, the boards, and the authorities. So, Department of Natural Resources, Department of Education, anything that has to do with any of the real estate matters of the state or revenue matters of the state, post-conviction relief issues, civil rights issues, elections issues. We have obviously, as you all know, our Medicaid fraud unit. We have our consumer protection unit, our Solicitor General's unit as well. So those are kind of the areas that we focus on. Now, as it relates to what y'all do on a day-to-day basis, some of the issues and, again, the agencies that you would work with or the divisions that you would work with in our department, consumer protection, Medicaid fraud, and prosecutions, False Claims Act type issues as well. And that's where we partner oftentimes with, or a lot, with our U.S. attorneys. We also partner with the SEC, IRS, Postal Service, CFTC, Treasury, among others, as we are dealing with what are oftentimes very complicated and sophisticated, multi-layered fraud cases that are impacting the economy in our state. So let me give you a couple of examples of some cases that have been fully vetted by our lawyers in the department that I'm allowed to talk about today. Another joke. I'm just falling short today. From consumer protection and prosecutions, here's an update on a case that we've been working on. Our Consumer Protection Division had received 2 complaints from Georgia victims through our internal intake system regarding a fraud scheme of online car sales. Both victims reported being scammed when attempting to purchase vehicles. The complaints were then referred to what is now our prosecutions division, and Brian had mentioned this. Let me just say, Medicaid fraud at one point was attached to the governor's office. It is now in our at the department as well. Consumer protection, same way. So we have streamlined both of those units that are now a part of our office. Within the office, we have moved some of the investigative team from consumer protection in particular to the prosecutions division so that we can do more with those resources as well. So the prosecutions division ended up taking this from CPU, the criminal investigation division, and it revealed a sophisticated fraud scheme. The scheme essentially followed the same pattern. First, the primary defendant provided co-conspirators, who are also defendants, with fraudulent identification documents. Next, the defendants opened private mailbox accounts at UPS stores. Unknown persons used these mailbox numbers to register fraudulent companies with various secretaries of state around the country. Then the defendants opened multiple bank accounts in the names of fraudulent businesses. Unknown persons would then advertise vehicles for sale online. These ads were often cloned from legitimate websites such as cargurus.com. Potential buyers would then respond to the ads and communicate with unknown persons posing as legitimate sellers. The communications were through email and phone calls and included bills of sale and car titles. The victims would wire these funds for the vehicles into those bank accounts set up by the defendants. The unknown persons posing as legitimate sellers would engage in stall tactics with the victims while the defendants and others withdrew the victims' money. Once the money was withdrawn, unknown persons posing as sellers would then cease all communications with the victims. This scheme was repeated using at least 30 different fraudulent companies, dozens of aliases, and included 77 victims. And as of right now, the total losses are around $2.2 million. And multiple defendants were indicted, and the case is currently working its way through the judicial system. One of our Medicaid fraud examples, and again, we work each and every day with these 3 gentlemen in the front row, and we're seeing more and more activity of those who are using disabled or older adults as pawns in their schemes. And this is a personal issue for me. This is one that I have taken a great bit of interest in, elder abuse and scams that relate to those that are vulnerable in our population, and we are not going to tolerate this type of behavior. So I'll give you an example, though. Earlier this year, we prosecuted an individual who owned and operated a corporation which advertised itself as providing structured living for adults with disabilities and assisting disabled adults to live a more active lifestyle. And while the organization provided some of these services to residents, it was funded almost entirely by defrauding the Independent Care Waiver Program, the ICWP, a Georgia Medicaid program intended to assist disabled adults to live independently in their own homes. The defendants wrongly utilized the Georgia Medicaid program to facilitate the payment of more than $800,000 to herself and others, and $150,000 of those funds were deposited directly into her own bank account. The defendant also convinced residents to open up joint bank accounts with her, and she accessed some of these residents' funds without their knowledge or without their permission. By accessing these accounts, she was able to transfer residents' money to the company's bank account, her own personal account, and those of her other businesses. She was sentenced to 10 years to serve 6 months on house arrest with an electronic ankle monitor. The remainder to serve on probation, and was ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution. So, 2 examples of kind of what we have been working on, and we expect to provide a high level of excellence and cooperation as we work with our federal partners. So we also provide, work again closely with state agencies, authorities, and boards through our Consumer Protection Division, our Medicaid Fraud and Protection Divisions, but we also work on a number of other issues. And I want to talk about those just very briefly, again, in the context of what we do. Again, day to day, we represent the agencies, the boards, and the authorities of state government, but there's a number of other policy areas and issue areas that we focus on with our federal partners as well. And while I have you, I want to mention those because I think they're very important for everybody from an awareness standpoint, because you need to have more eyes on these issues, and they're all issues I think people can generally get behind. And one is the fight against human trafficking. We work very, very closely with our partners. Our main policy initiative this past legislative session was to stand up a human trafficking unit, which we now have 6 individuals, 2 prosecutors, an investigator, an analyst, a victims advocate that are going to be working with these folks' offices and others, as well as the GBI, DFACS, and others. Now, why this issue? Some folks think it's just an Atlanta issue. It's not. It's not just a state issue. It's a national issue as well, which is why it's good to have regional partnerships with attorneys general and U.S. attorneys and others from around the country. But in Georgia, just to give you an example, there's a group called Georgia Cares that works with victims. Last year, they helped 800 victims from 135 of Georgia's 159 counties. So that gives you an example right there. Last year, the National Human Trafficking Hotline that's run by a group called Polaris received 522 contacts from potential victims in the state of Georgia. Actually, that's since 2016. And there was a 22% increase in cases and 154% increase in potential victims. So that's why we've created this unit to work with DAs and with our U.S. attorney partners and GBI and others to make sure that we protect our most vulnerable. We're also working collectively on the opioid crisis in the state. Somebody asked me this briefly earlier, and I talk about this issue no matter where I go for 1,000 different reasons. But I say it's an issue that knows no economic, geographic, or demographic boundaries. It's unbelievable where I go around the state, how many people will come up to me and say it's impacted them personally. It's a workforce issue. You see 20% of all men that are no longer in the workforce, 25% of all women are not in as a result of the opioid crisis. But it's not just the opioid crisis, it's addiction at large. But let me give you an example of how this is impacting the state of Georgia. Just one county alone, DeKalb County, from 2006 to 2012, 76,758,734 prescription pain pills were prescribed, which is 15 pills for every man, woman, and child in the county. So what are we doing? We filed a lawsuit against the manufacturers and the distributors, like so many others around the state have as well, including cities and counties. We've created a statewide task force to try to get folks together. This is National Recovery Month, and so we have focused on stigma. And what we've seen is, again, trying to get folks to talk about this issue so that we can get the help that they need. And that's an issue that impacts lawyers. It impacts everybody. So, and I appreciate the partnership we've had with our U.S. attorneys on that as well. Another big issue for us and around the country is gang activity. And these guys have been incredible mentors to me as it relates to this issue and as we get involved in the fight. A recent GBI survey of more than 500 Georgia law enforcement officials said that gangs were the #1 issue and the greatest frustration that they have. And this shift from homegrown neighborhood gangs to national gang control, which happened about 8 to 10 years ago in the state of Georgia, with the help of social media, has been one of the things that we've been working on. And we created the Georgia Anti-Gang Network, because my friend Bobby Christine said to fight a network, you got to have your own network, and that's due to his military experience. So we created the Georgia Anti-Gang Network. And for the first time ever in the state of Georgia, We've had the U.S. attorneys, the FBI, Postal Service, so many folks from our federal partners, along with corrections, juvenile justice, community supervision, the GBI, us, sheriffs, police chiefs, and DAs in the room together to talk about how we can work better together to protect communities, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. I've mentioned elder abuse. 1 in 10 Americans age 60 and older have experienced some form of abuse, and this is going to be an issue that we continue to focus on as far as the eye can see. And from a consumer protection issue, because I know this is something that we can all share in our frustration. Who loves robocalls? 47 billion robocalls occurred in the United States last year, many of which came from outside the country. Another great example of how you have to have federal, state, and local partnerships. And so we have been working with the FCC, other state attorneys general, and the private sector to work both at the phone level from a software perspective, at the network level, and from an investigations network, because what happens is, as you all know, that a lot of scams are perpetrated. So another great example of how you have this federal partnership. So with that, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to be here today. Thank you for being a part of this conference. This is an incredible group of folks that I know that y'all are hearing from. It's an honor to be a part of it as well. And I think, Brian, you want me to take a question or two, or are we running over? And I know it's early. So all the easy ones come to me and the tough ones go to those guys. If not, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one, U.S. Attorney from the Northern District of Alabama. There's so many factors to consider. Thank y'all for having me. Appreciate y'all.